Are we serious about it? Or are we just making these conversations around these rooms and these safe havens in which we can discuss and talk about? Is it happening on the ground? There is no local now. With the OECD guidelines and with the Frank Act in place, business and human rights, everything is really becoming global. And therefore we really cannot say that it's just a small little effort of giving a small bribery, or the Bribery Act of UK is actually looking at your markets, because your markets are all in the Western world. And of course, China and other places. So everything is becoming global, and therefore there is no question of talking about corruption being very local and small, and the private players are not engaged into such practices, which is incorrect. I have pondered over this topic, and I was thinking to myself that with this Make in India campaign, as Madam just actually also spoke about, there has become a very important thrust of finding the right vendors. And the practices to not only select the vendors, but to ensure the codes of conduct, that's what we talk of, codes of conduct, is very clearly articulated, and all the vendors are required to sign at the dotted line. Signing is not enough. It's not enough. It's a question of actually due diligence. It's a question of actually carrying out checks and balances and making sure that what you have listed in the codes of conduct are actually being implemented and followed in letter and spirit. I was amazed yesterday, you must have heard the newspapers about Rajasthan, about the government, senior officials being nabbed for bribery. It's not new. It happens, I think, not only in Rajasthan. It just came out. And we can keep talking of a number of examples which I would not like to share because you're already aware of it. And also in the private sector, it is equally happening. How do we stem this curse which is actually coming forward? And when we talk about this Make in India concept, we want to take it forward. We've got to be transparent. We've got to make sure that even if we don't call it the Integrity Pact, but we must realize that it is going to be observed right across markets in the global space, wherever our markets are. The big houses of last 2 years, you must have heard of the Rana Plaza incident which took place in April 2013. It's 2 years down the line. I mean, it's basically nothing else but not giving the correct facilities to the workers. Losing 1,131 people died, and till to date, they have not been able to actually repair that work. And that was also inadvertently related to nothing else but corruption. Because you are not looking after the rights of the people in Bangladesh, today that's the major industry, garment industry, the very major force, major industry in Bangladesh. Similar things happen in India. Why isn't the environment becoming more and more aggressive to get more investment in India? Why has POSCO decided to move off? Or just debating on moving off for the last 15 years, they've been fighting for it. Of that land, and that's the largest FDI in India. Why is ArcelorMittal thinking of looking elsewhere? It's because of these practices, unfortunately, that have been carrying on for many years, that the clearances are not being accorded, land acquisition processes are being delayed. Therefore, you are not being able to actually come out with what you want to do in a time frame that you've actually laid out for yourselves. And POSCO, ArcelorMittal, moving out again. Intel wanted to set up a base over here, they went to China. Because of these practices, and I'm glad that we are debating this discussion, is not only theoretical, but there is a lot of practical aspects that we must understand. Why are we losing out? We can keep talking about, the other day I was flying back from Australia, just 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, there was one gentleman coming from, he bought a flight from Vietnam. Now, there was a lot of interest in Vietnam, a lot of investment was to be taking place in Vietnam. He said nothing has changed. We are very suspicious of coming to India because of these practices. So you can keep citing the dotted line. Unless you actually implement it And today, of course, there are regulators and there are these institutions which are coming up which are really making it happen. And that is what is, I think, critical for getting the correct climate for investment. Speaking about the private sector, I would like to reiterate the lines of Sir Suma Chakrabarti, and thank you, Shabnam, that you had shared this with me. He was the former president, former secretary of the UK's Department of International Development. Without growth, we will not be able to achieve the Millennium Development Goals.